So hello to everyone. My name is Anaïs and I am the FARMD Community of Practice Analyst. Welcome to our webinar on promoting biodiversity through value chains and innovative finance. So this webinar is co-organized and promoted by IFAD's Inclusive Rural Finance, IFAD ECG Biodiversity Team, and FARMD, which is hosted by the Platform for Agricultural Risk Management. So just before starting, I wanted to tell you some key information. So first of all, this session will be recorded and also available on replay and shared on FARMD's website and also social media. Of course, during this webinar, you are more than welcome to ask your questions, and you can do so by using the chat box on the bottom of your screen, and also then the speakers will direct them during the dedicated time. And eventually, at the end of this webinar, you will see appear on your screen an automatic survey. It's just for you to give us some feedback. And now I will share with you the link to our FARMD Community of Practice inside the chat. The FARMD Community of Practice is an interactive forum on agricultural risk management where hundreds of practitioners from around the world exchange and share knowledge and best practices. So you are more than welcome to join us there. And now, without further ado, I will leave the floor to Lorna Grace. So over to you, Lorna.
Okay, thank you, Anaïs. My apologies if my technical abilities are weak here. I welcome everyone. This is one, as Anaïs mentioned, one of a series of Inclusive Rural Finance Network seminars or webinars that we're having, and the last few have been around PMUs, about interest rate subsidies, and obviously it covers a wide variety of topics because now we're doing biodiversity and value chains and inclusive finance. So I just wanted to make a quick note, integrating biodiversity back into our landscapes and in many cases our value chains is increasingly a focus of how we work across IFAD. And that's why both Matt and I collaborate along with the rest of the biodiversity team to really try to work together to come up with ways that we can do that. And in fact, biodiversity, along with climate, is one of the three key, I'm not allowed to say pillars, but focuses of our themes of IFAD 13. The pace of biodiversity investments, like climate investments, can be sped up by establishing a business case and thus attract a breadth of interested investors, whether they're public, private, or somewhere in between. So to keep things short, because we have a very brief time, I'm pleased, and we are pleased, therefore, the IRF network is pleased, therefore, to have with us today professionals at the forefront of making the case to attract finance for biodiversity. So first, from our own ranks, Matthew Mather is a development specialist with experience working on rural development, food systems, nature-based solutions, and biodiversity conservation in academia and in IFAD. As one of our colleagues here in IFAD, he is supporting the implementation of our biodiversity strategy aimed at enhancing IFAD's work on biodiversity and nature-based solutions in rural areas. After that, we have Leander Reyes, is an economist with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN economic team based in Washington, D.C. His work focuses on the socioeconomic and environmental evaluation of nature-based solutions and the development of policies, action plans, and business cases to implement these solutions. So Leander has worked in IUCN since 2016, has a double degree in applied biological sciences from Ghent University, sorry if I mispronounced that, and in Belgium, and in resource economics from the Humboldt University of Berlin. After that, we have Greg Fishbein. He has had a number of senior positions at the Nature Conservancy, and currently he is the Director of Agriculture Finance, where he works with lenders and investors to develop innovative financial solutions to reduce deforestation and improve soil health in agriculture supply chains. So exactly what we're talking about today. And prior to joining the Nature Conservancy in 2002, Greg was a partner at Mercer Management Consulting in Boston and an aide to Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Well, that's a blast from the past. And we also have, thankfully, Greg's colleague, who's Robert J. Tanzi. He's a senior policy advisor, China at the Nature Conservancy, and he's the senior policy advisor, China and global policy lead, degraded lands and restoration, and has worked there for 14 years. And his professional background includes diplomacy, business promotion, and energy. So welcome to our externals, and welcome to all of our staff in the chat. And let's just go right to it. Matthew, why don't you get started?
Thanks for that introduction, Lorna. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Can I just check everyone can see that okay? Perfect. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. It's great to see so many people there. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview to frame a little bit of the discussion on this topic, and just show how IFAD is working on biodiversity, but also the interlinkages with biodiversity and value chains, and promoting biodiversity within small scale agri-food value chains, and how it can better do that. So first of all, I just want to jump into sort of why we want to integrate biodiversity into smallholder value chains. So initially, value chains, we know they can have sort of negative impacts on sourcing landscapes in terms of reducing genetic diversity in many cases, but there's also real potential for them to have a positive impact. We look at deforestation-free supply chains, for instance. So in terms of the sort of benefits for producers, we can see that promoting biodiversity value chains can have benefits in terms of climate resilience. If we look at, for instance, valorizing climate resilient species, crop species, for instance, and there's a lot of evidence as well to show that promoting biodiversity can have positive impacts in terms of actual economic gains as well, and the cost benefit ratios from approaches such as agroforestry, for instance. And then there's also evidence on these approaches in terms of having a positive impact into for women's and youth empowerment as well, and food and nutrition security. So then looking beyond that onto the private sector and what's in it for them as well. So we know that there's increased consumer awareness around some of these issues, and around ensuring that there's no real risk to biodiversity. We're actually having a positive impact through consumer choices. So this can really build a trust between companies and consumers. There's regulations and laws now in terms of EU regulations on deforestation-free value chains, which has increased pressure for companies to comply with. And then the global biodiversity framework is also putting pressure on countries, on private sector as well. And there's initiatives such as the Nature Financial Disclosure Framework, which is also supporting companies in actually disclosing their impacts on nature. And then generally, there's increased private sector awareness that the business case, and that companies can no longer afford to have a negative impact on nature. That there needs to be more sustainability in the long run. So this is just a quick snapshot of the IFAD value chain stocktake, which was recently carried out. 80% of IFAD's projects work on value chains in some way. The majority of these are on crops, and also some on livestock. Very little there actually on forests, so there's an opportunity to really boost the work there in that area. But we can see that in crops and livestock, in terms of boosting biodiversity in these areas, there's real potential. And this is an overview of the global biodiversity agenda, which really frames IFAD's and sort of the global action on biodiversity over the next years. Split by genetic, species, and ecosystem diversity. There's 23 targets in here, of which many have real resonance with the theme of today's webinar. So there's targets on private sector disclosure, resource mobilization, genetic diversity. So various targets there which have real resonance for the work on value chains. And here's just the typology of the different biodiversity value chains which we can talk about. So this is just something that we've been thinking about as a team. So when we can think about genetic diversity in terms of, for instance, promoting neglected and underutilized species, which are often sort of left out of traditional research on crops. There's great work, for instance, by the Arc of Taste and the Slow Food Network around actually valorizing some of these value chains. And then we can also look at ecosystem and tree-based value chains, which really derive the value from protecting and ensuring healthy ecosystems. So we can look at honey value chains, for instance, and also beyond food, looking at tourism and carbon and biodiversity credits there. And then there's a really key entry point on standards. So fair trade, for instance, then looking at textile value chains and better cotton initiatives. So that's something that these when we talk about these value chains, we really need to be well aware of. So now we're just going to look at some of the barriers which we've come across when we're looking at some of promoting biodiversity in some of these value chains. So first of all, just on the geographic side, so often there's elements of biodiversity activities that might not be traditionally part of the value chain activities. So for instance, green corridors or buffer zones. So how do we look to fund that activity? Maybe looking at sort of public finance to fund those public goods. So blending the finance there. How do we avoid leakages as well, where, for instance, deforestation might be moved to another area of a landscape? Then processing and market challenges as well. So we know that that in terms of the harvest, especially wild harvesting of some of these products, can be quite complex. So accounting for the complexities with this as well. Addressing consumer demands. So there might be consumer demands for uniformity. For instance, if we think about bringing in new rice varieties, so how do we actually sort of maybe bring in behavioural change, complementary activities to address some of these issues, and then connecting smallholders to interested consumers, being that bridge between the market and the producers. So in terms of time and risk, so there's a need for a long-term vision with these investments. And for many investors who look at maybe at short or medium-term returns, this might not be the case. So we need to think about other funding sources, perhaps. And also there's perceived risks and maybe complexities amongst private sector about these sorts of investments. So overcoming this challenge. And then in terms of viability and access to finance, so there's high costs attached to a lot of these activities. So maybe certifications, infrastructure, technology, and also getting the incentives right so that smallholders aren't so that we can match or beat some of the opportunity cost, which might be associated to more traditional, maybe less sustainable practices. And then the policy barrier as well. So overcoming perverse subsidies. So we know that there's 1.8 trillion is spent on perverse subsidies, which have a negative impact on the environment. So overcoming these, working with governments perhaps to overcome these, and then support, and then the challenge that there's maybe in many cases there's inadequate knowledge amongst institutions and government extension service as well around some of these practices. So working with that. So building on these barriers, we've been thinking a lot about how do we make these biodiversity investments really attractive for both the private sector and for smallholders as well. So thinking first about how we can make them attractive for the private sector. First, it's really about building the business case and ensuring that those flows of revenue for investors. I'm sure our IUCN colleague will speak more to this later, but we really need to think about how we can match our investments with potentially grants, be they from Jeff and GCF as anchors, to support building the business case. So IFAD has its economic and financial analysis frameworks, and also its biodiversity indicator, which can do these assessments, but we might need more in-depth assessments, which require resources to actually build this business case to be able to show the effectiveness, both in terms of economic advantages, but also social, environmental benefits as well. And then supporting with designing these investable pipeline of bankable projects, looking again not just at bankable in terms of private goods, but also the public goods that we can get from that. Then equipping farmers with the right tools, materials, infrastructure. Traceability systems are key, especially around the deforestation-free legislation which is coming in. So having this in place so that private investors, companies can plug into what is already there and what might be more attractive for them. And then looking at innovative finance solutions, so blended mechanisms that IFAD is already operating, such as first loss guarantees, and sort of plugging this into some of these biodiversity investments, and then also bundling maybe private and public goods through payment for ecosystem service schemes, and also carbon and biodiversity credit approaches as well, to really sort of boost the returns for private investors. And then also enabling in creating an enabling policy environment, so supporting governments with arranging concessional finances, appropriate financing, subsidies. We know that for the Global Biodiversity Framework, there's a target on reversing subsidies, and then developing institutional capacities to be able to support this financing and value chains effectively. And as a transversal issues, ensuring the equity of these investments and adequate impact assessment as well. So then looking at making biodiversity investments attractive for smallholder communities. So we know that smallholders are as much risk averse as private investors when it comes to implementing some of these activities. So ensuring that the right incentive mechanisms are in place. So how can IFAD support with not just financial incentives and matching some of those and beating some of those opportunity costs from elsewhere, but also assessing the needs of the local context, where we might find that tenure security is as much as of an incentive as the financial incentive. So, and that these may also be temporal and might change throughout a project. So just having not just a one size fits all approach to incentives. So improving the market and demand for smallholder sustainably grown produce. So creating connections between farmers and private companies, these vertical connections, and also supporting with the costs of certification, standards, and traceability to be able to effectively access some of these markets and access these premium markets, should I say. And then maybe bringing in behavioural change programs to actually create the demand as well for some of this produce. And then jump into strengthening knowledge. So this can be through setting up field models to actually show the effectiveness of some of these approaches, providing training to extension agents, for instance, so that there's that sustainability in the long term. And then also strengthening knowledge of policymakers through developing bottom-up evidence to support policy, so that some of these investments can be sustained and brought in the long term. And then aligning policies and government support, so working closely with the government on creating the enabling conditions, working on assessing the subsidies and how they can be made to be more to incentivize more sustainable approaches, and also bringing in also approaches such as improving knowledge systems and extension services as well. So this is just an IFAD example that I just want to speak to. Projects in Brazil, which really focused on through effective, low-cost, participatory guarantee schemes, which acted as to really create sort of certifications which were accessible by smallholder communities, contributing to avoided deforestation. Also, the project strengthened local seed networks as well. And really promoted local sustainable produce and local niche value chains. So having that positive environmental impact, but also social in terms of also supporting youth and women's empowerment as well. So I'm conscious that I'm running out of time a bit, so I'm just going to jump past this, but I'll share the slides later. And I'll quickly just run through a couple of engagement and partnerships that IFAD is working on. So the UN Decade, there's a lot of really interesting work around building the business case and tools that are being created for building our business case for restoration, that we can really support our work, and we're also sharing in that network as well. There's a new landscape initiative that's being launched at COP28 that we're looking to be involved in as well. And then we're obviously working with our colleagues here, TNC and IUCN, at identifying how we can bring together our complementary expertise in terms of joint resource mobilization as well. There's other partnerships as well, such as the MBSAP Accelerator, where we're looking to help countries bring food systems into the global biodiversity framework and the strategy and action plans to support that. So we'll be working more on that in the coming up to COP16 next year, and the Just Institute as well, which I know that it's being led by some of the value chain colleagues. So finally, just looking ahead. So in terms of our work around biodiversity and innovative finance and value chains, first sort of pillar is looking at mobilizing resources. So how can we leverage our work on the GEF food systems integrated program? So one of the actual hubs in this co-led IFAD FAO co-led program is on private sector value chains and investment. So we'll be looking at that in supporting the projects within that, on designing food systems investment pathways, adequate financial services, and strengthening the business case. So it'll be there's definitely scope there to sort of promote this work around building the business case and identifying positive biodiversity value chains there. There's a global biodiversity fund as well, which will be launched next year to promote more investment in biodiversity, especially targeting innovative finance, and there's 20% as well for farmer organisations and Indigenous peoples. IFAD 13 replenishment is targeting an integrated approach to climate and biodiversity, and also specifically names niche value chains as well as an approach to sustainably using for the protection of biodiversity. We're also working on policy engagement, so integrating food systems in BSAP. So we might be doing some capacity building for countries' focal points on that. And we have a COP28 side event, which the biodiversity team and also the Asia Pacific team are running on nature-based solutions. And we'll be looking there at also engaging with some of these landscape initiatives that I've mentioned. We also have, on the knowledge part, an agroforestry stock take, which will be launched in early next year. And there's a key section there on finance and value chains. And we're also looking in collaboration with the value chain team on putting together a note on how we can promote biodiversity in IFAD's value chain investment. and another learning event on innovative finance as well. And then finally, just from a rural finance team perspective, I think it'd be interesting to see how we can sort of strengthen the collaboration. Not just I've been looking at sort of some of your operational guidelines and sort of pro-poor value chains, and biodiversity comes up as really avoiding the risk to biodiversity. So it would be interesting to see how we can work together to promote biodiversity as a positive, not just as avoiding that risk, but actually having a positive impact there in those value chain investments. And then again, how the BDT team can give practical support in promoting biodiversity in some of these investments. And then just a question that we can maybe go towards at the end. So what does the PMI rural finance team need from the biodiversity team in terms of mainstreaming biodiversity into value chain investments? I think that might be an interesting point of conversation. So sorry I've run over a little bit, but yeah, thanks for inviting me, and I'll go back to Lorna.
Thanks, Matt. That's good. And with no further ado, let's move right into our next presentation by Leander, and we'll get some interesting examples there if you're ready to go.
Yes, I am. So good day, everybody. So thanks for the opportunity to quickly present some of the work that we at IUCN have been working on, focusing, and in this case, for this webinar specifically, not as much on biodiversity value chains, as much as biodiversity in value chains or supply chains. So I'll just quickly present some of the concepts used, and then two examples of field work, specifically focusing also on some of the difficulties we had with actually developing a business case for investment in biodiversity. So conceptually, when we start to look at this and really try to understand, okay, how can we link biodiversity with supply chains or value chains, is we look at it now from the idea that the landscape, including biodiversity as a key characteristic of landscape, is just a part of the supply chain. This is nothing revolutionary, no, but it just helps both conceptually as well as with communication. When you talk with different actors of where we stand, and then it building on this concept. Then we link it with natural capital as a key input for production of different crops, etc. That supply chains rely on. And so this concept, which has now been much more formalized specifically for the business sector through the TNFD framework that was launched in September, basically helps us to, on the one hand, understand what the impacts are on natural capital in a specific landscape, and on the other hand, then the dependencies production processes have on a landscape. Now you think about pollination services, water, etc. And then, of course, the impacts can reduce the provision of ecosystem services, which poses a risk, but it also poses opportunities. And it's these opportunities that we can then try to use to develop business cases for investment in natural capital, in the improvement of natural capital, in the conservation of natural capital, understanding that biodiversity is an integral part of that natural capital. And so through a project that has now finished, we start doing that. Now this is called the Resupply project, which we implemented in Tanzania, Ghana, and Peru. But I'll just show two of the examples. So in Ghana, in the Wassa and Menfi landscape, we work together with the cocoa trader as well as with cocoa producers to identify some of the key risks in the landscape that have potential to threaten cocoa production in the near and further future. And so one of these threats are then specifically the reduction of soil, the reduction in fertility due to high levels of erosion. And as part then of the proposed solutions for this, a series of cocoa agroforestry systems were identified. So based on this loss of soil natural capital and to develop the business case, we then stated, okay, what we can do now is we can, on the one hand, understand the current risk to soil by looking and trying to model soil erosion for the whole landscape, where in the map on your left, what you see is the darker areas are areas with a high level of erosion, and the more yellow areas are levels with lower levels of erosion, which also coincide perfectly with protected areas. Then based on that, we can try to understand what will happen if we shift the current plantations that use cocoa that has no shade, so non-agroforestry cocoa, to cocoa agroforestry systems, to then try to measure the impact. And that's what you see in the map on the right, is it shows us where the potential impact on soil erosion when we shift that. So the idea is, if we quantify that, ideally we would then have this reduction degradation as a key benefit to develop a business case. And there is a potential to reduce the use of fertilizers, especially in the long term. If fertility increases, an increased resilience of the production system. If you have a healthy soil based on improved water retention capacities of soil, etc. So we did have that conceptual case, but we had difficulties in translating that to a specific financial benefit, just due to, I would say, time and other resource constraints. So we had the business case, but then in order to really translate it to an investment case, what we did was we focused specifically on cocoa plantations that were older and needed renewing to strengthen the case. Now, where we still have these additional benefits of reduction in erosion, etc., but because it was difficult in this specific area to capture the financial benefits of erosion reduction, so we focused on the financial benefits of renewing cocoa plantations. Then, in a second example, where we worked in this case in the El Dorado landscape in Peru, where there was a genuine interest, on the one hand, in looking at restoration, also in this case in cocoa plantations, to have a positive impact on biodiversity, but also to develop carbon neutral supply chains. Because both linked, interestingly, with contributions to ESG goals that a cocoa trader may have. It linked also very well with the interests of the cocoa producers, and can be used as an input for corporate reporting, such as, for example, under the Global Reporting Initiative or the Science-Based Target Network. So as a starting point here, we used IUCN's Species Threat Abatement and Restoration Metric, which is a tool that helps us to understand in a given landscape, based on the presence of specific species within that area as compared to the global range of those species, as well as in extinction risk, to understand what type of benefits for biodiversity do we have if, on the one hand, we look at the reduction of ongoing threats in the landscape, as well as the reduction of past threats, so specifically to restoration. And so both of these metrics, they help us in understanding what is happening within a landscape and what can we do. And so for ongoing threats we looked at, there is clearly an impact of deforestation, which was also there in the past. With the difference, of course, is that the ongoing threat happens for the whole landscape, whereas the past threat restoration was only happening in the south of the landscape, which is what you see on the right map. As the left, the upper corner, is still currently forest, partially a protected area. So based on this and the location of the cocoa plantations, we could then make the case for, if you restore, then you'll have a benefit for specific types of species. In the case of cocoa systems, mostly threatened bird species, not as much maybe the larger mammals that are also present in there. However, when we looked at it really from making a business case from an investment point of view and quantifying clear impacts, we did see that our case was stronger when we specifically looked at the impact on carbon. Also, both a reduction of carbon emissions due to the reduction or change in use of fertilizers, as well as the increased carbon sequestration by planting trees. So in this case, from shifting from monoculture cocoa to an agroforestry system, or improving different levels of cocoa systems with trees. And so again, although we did strengthen the business case by really looking at biodiversity and really highlighting specific contributions of restoration to the current and past extinction risk of species, our business case specifically for, in this case, our corporate partner was stronger when looking at it from a carbon perspective. We hope, of course, in the future that will change. And little by little, I think now, especially with the use of the TNFD, I hope that more and more companies will start to include natural capital and specific biodiversity metrics into their business decision makings. But we did see still some difference between the theory and then the practical implementation, and really making a case for investment in these specific areas. So one of the other things that we found was, of course, there is still quite a lot of complexity related to biodiversity, and especially the link between biodiversity and natural capital. So we now participate in a new project. This is a Horizon Europe project called Circhive, where specifically what we are doing is, on the one hand, from a methodological point of view, trying to integrate biodiversity footprinting with natural capital accounting, specifically building on the system of environmental economic accounts, both ecosystem accounts as the central framework as developed by the UN, and then also including biodiversity. And then in a second phase, which will start in 6 months, we will actually test this with a series of companies and hopefully strengthen once again the way we can develop business cases for biodiversity within supply chains / value chains. So just in some of the work that we within IUCN have been doing. There is, of course, other colleagues working on other aspects, but I just wanted to highlight some of this specifically on the inclusion of biodiversity within supply chains and the business case aligned with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We're starting to get some questions, so it's good. Just hold it for a few more minutes. Let's go to our next presenter, Greg Fishman, and he's ready to go. Excellent. I'll let you go. Thanks. You have to unmute.
Greg, you just have to, on the bottom of your screen, you should see on the bottom left, you should see the mute and mute.
Yeah, sorry, I had to stop sharing, but it wouldn't let me do it while I was sharing. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, all set. You can see it and you can hear me, right? So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about a particular initiative that the Nature Conservancy, I'm with the Nature Conservancy, I lead our ag finance work, that we've launched 2 years ago, focusing on the Amazon, Cerrado, and Chaco biomes of South America. And it's primarily focused on, our work there is primarily focused on working to stop deforestation and conversion of natural vegetation in the Amazon, Cerrado, and Chaco regions of Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. Brazil itself is about 40% of tropical deforestation now. So the stakes are pretty high, and the Chaco region of Paraguay and Argentina is also a highly threatened area for both biodiversity and climate reasons. Before I get into the specific initiative, just to, as context, we work on a lot of different interventions to try to stop deforestation in the region. We work with major grain trader. The biggest drivers of deforestation are cattle and soy production. So we work a lot with the big grain traders and slaughterhouses. parts of the supply chain on their sourcing policies. We work on monitoring and jurisdictional efforts and policy and with global investor community. But this sort of finance piece is we see as an important piece of the puzzle in driving the sectoral transformation there. Because, for one, the demand for these products is going to grow, so we need to figure out how to finance growth without conversion of native vegetation. And also, in terms of working with the stakeholders, whether it be growers, government, et cetera, it's very good to have a positive pro-growth agenda that involves rising farmer incomes and GDP, and not just be, asking people to stop doing things. So this is a nice complement to the other kind of pieces of the work we're doing to address deforestation in the region. On the finance piece, again, it's the focus is up in these key biomes in South America that are highly threatened, and the production models that we're seeking to drive finance to are expansion of agriculture over already cleared pasture lands. There's millions of hectares of land that's already been cleared that's suitable for agricultural expansion. So we want to direct more and more production there and away from native vegetation. Sustainable intensification. So there's big yield gaps, particularly in cattle, and that can easily supply the growth on the existing pasture land and actually free up land for other uses if there were just reasonable improvements in yields. Still using pasture-based systems, but just doing it a bit more intensively. And then finally, agroforestry and non-timber forest products are an important piece of this. So even though those aren't producing cattle and soy per se, they're an alternative opportunity for a lot of smaller farmers to engage in instead of getting involved in cattle and soy, and also support restoration activities, which are in many cases required by law for legal compliance. So there's been a lot of discussion about this sort of business case around this work. I mean, these production models are all models that have an ROI and are already happening to some extent in the region. But it's really a question of how can we put a lot more investment in energy so that these become the predominant production models and not clearing of native vegetation. So we're talking about financial products with longer tenors and grace periods and attractive interest rates and let's say less difficult credit requirements to reach a broader set of farmers, so that we can really mainstream these type of production practices and versus the more destructive practices that involve clearing native vegetation. So this is a very practical initiative in the sense that our goal is to get $1 billion dispersed by 2025 and $10 billion by 2030. So it's quite private sector oriented. So we're really working with the financial community as partners in this to basically help and support them and raise the visibility of the need to expand these types of investments. So we've got what we call signatories, about 16 of them right now. And there's a broader set of companies and financial institutions that we work with who for various reasons, aren't formally part of the initiative. But we're working with, I'd say, most of the key players in the region who are in a position to provide finance to farmers, including banks, asset managers, catalytic funds, input companies, et cetera. And the main ask and offer we have to them is, we're basically asking them to innovate, create products and financial solutions for farmers that can help support these practice adoption. We have a set of guidelines that define, what are acceptable practices and the minimum E&S requirements and all that kind of thing. I should say this initiative is a partnership of TNC, UNEP, and Tropical Forest Alliance. So we work. There's a lot of collective expertise in those groups around, to kind of help define the products and the E&S requirements, et cetera. So what we're asking these partners to do is commit to creating innovative products and to actually disperse money to farmers that follow these guidelines, and also to become sectoral leaders championing, the need, not just themselves, but more broadly in the sector to expand investment in these type of activities. what we offer as an initiative is both a lot of bilateral support and advice to entities on, and just to highlight some of our key areas of work. We're basically there to advise and support them in the implementation and raise the visibility. So we work with our signatories and partners on the environmental management and impact indicators, trying to bring in catalytic capital to these commercial mechanisms, and we have a lot of relationships with DFIs and other providers of catalytic capital, and so trying to better connect up the commercial and the catalytic capital. We've been doing pioneering work on how to leverage carbon, whether it be monetized or to help connect up these activities with the need for financial institutions and companies to meet their net zero commitments. There's a whole set of capacity building we do. UNEP leads a whole training program with financial institutions. There's other knowledge sharing and knowledge production activities we have. We have producers advisory groups to really make sure we bring the producer perspective to all these discussions. And very importantly, we hold a lot of TFA, which is part of World Economic Forum, leads the hosting of a lot of major events at COPs and Davos and other major global forums to help put a spotlight on the need for this, raise the visibility for financing the ag transition, and raising the level of ambition among financial institutions. The type of financial solutions varies a lot that different institutions are creating. I'd say that the number one area is farm loan products, that credit products for farmers, but there are also farmland investment funds that buy land, and there's some interesting capital market products that have developed, particularly in Brazil, that securitize agricultural receivables. There's corporate debt instruments. There's carbon structures. So it's kind of in a very innovative ecosystem where a lot of different kind of ideas have been emerging to help support farmers to finance this transition. In our first year, so we launched this about 2 years ago in 2022, which was the first year. There were 8 products that were developed by our partners that dispersed $111 million. So we have a little report out on that, and we'll do another one in this next February, highlighting how things have developed in 2023. But it's great to see real financial products with real money changing hands, at least in this first year, which was great to see. Of course, we have a long way to go. This chart is just kind of showing, conceptually, it's a very conceptual illustration of how we're all hoping to see the growth curve, what the growth curve we hope to see in the development of the capital markets for these type of lending and investment products for the ag transition. And this slide's focused on Brazil, but these first set of products we have, I would call we're still kind of in the pilot phase. I mean, I think we've come a long way. If you look back 3, 4, or 5 years ago, outside of government programs, there was really no private, lending and investment aligned with this type of agricultural transition. And now we've got, dozens of, 16 signatories and other companies, and 8 products in the market, or probably about 10 now. Hundreds of millions of dollars flowing. So that's a good start, but we really need to get up to billions. And to do that, we need beyond the sort of pilot, more bespoke type of products and get to more mainstream replicable products that can attract mainstream institutional investment. And we do see a key role in this sort of growth curve ramp up phase for catalytic capital, because we hear often from our commercial partners that they're creating these products, but at this stage in the market where there's still a lot of risk, it's very helpful to have partners that can take first loss or subordinated tranches, or otherwise help de-risk some of these investments so that they can reach broader sets of farmers and go for longer tenors and finance production models that haven't been as mainstream in past years. And the hope is that if over the next sort of 4 or 5 years we can build that track record, then these type of financial investments can stand on their own through commercial capital. So the last comments are just some of the key challenges. It all sounds good, and I think we've made great progress in moving this agenda forward. I think some of the challenges are, it's not been easy to get. There's a lot of financial actors like supply chain companies or major banks that are actually already doing this are working on this to some extent, but they're sometimes reluctant to sign on to a new commitment or initiative because they've made so many commitments around net zero, et cetera. So we obviously have several major companies and financial institutions as part of it, but it does take some work to convince them to sign on to a new thing and be really committed to it. So that's been taking some work. And then it's just, I think, as you are all very familiar with, even though there is a business case and there are existing models for these type of financial products, for any institution to create a new product, and particularly if it's a blended finance type of structure, it just, it ends up taking quite a bit of time to get these structured and get the agreements in place and create terms that work for both investors and farmers. And so, we all want to move 0 to 60 very quickly, but it's just been taking time. Catalytic capital, as I said, I think does have a really important role if we really want to get this into the billions of dollars. And there is a decent amount of catalytic capital around, but it often has very extensive restrictions and limitations and has a very long process to access it. And so a lot of it doesn't blend very well with commercial capital that kind of wants to move quickly and needs things to be fairly simple and clear so they can execute. And so that's another area we're working on to try to figure out how to better blend catalytic with commercial capital. And then I would just finally say Argentina and Paraguay have been more difficult environments than Brazil, just given some of the political and macroeconomic and other issues that are happening there. So I'm going to stop there, and thanks for the opportunity to share this with you.
Great. Really interesting. Thank you, guys. I want to, since we're a little bit over, but we're okay. I want to open it up for some questions. So if anybody has some questions that they want to make, just raise your hand and please. I have many questions, but I tend to dominate things if I'm given half the chance. So, but let's see what we have from the floor, please. Go ahead. Anything happening there?
Someone raised their hand, so I will. Okay.
Adam, yep. Go for it.
I think
it's Nadim.
Nadim, right?
Yep. Go ahead, Nadim.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Excellent. No, thank you very much, colleagues, for this. I mean, very interesting. I mean, and really very inspiring presentations. Maybe I have one or two questions for the presentation. The first one, I mean, the examples that some of them that we've seen in terms of, let's say, adding additional, let's say, trees, etc. They are mainly, let's say, could be applied on tropical areas or humid areas, But thinking about, let's say, arid and semi-arid regions, it's very difficult. Access to water is a constraining factor, So probably this type of, let's say, examples are not very easy to replicate in other regions of the world. It's easier to do it in, let's say, humid and tropical areas, but very difficult in the others. So maybe if you can give us also some examples where in arid regions with water constraint, how can we go through it? The second one also in terms of when we have all these, let's say, trees, I was wondering at some point in terms of quality of the product, I mean, the main product that we are targeting and its, let's say, growth, depending on the density of the trees that you are putting there from the agronomic point of view, will it also impact at some point the let's say, the productivity of the tree, the main crops that you want to target, keeping in mind that you are adding additional trees, which can also have some impacts in terms of luminosity, in terms of water consumption, and also in terms of soil. And finally, for the last presentation, I want to understand a little bit, because here, I mean, I work with IFAD, sorry, and I'm based in NEN region, I mean, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe. And we are struggling here just to provide for smallholder farmers, as IFAD, you work with them, to get access to let's say the very, let's say, basic financial products. My understanding of the examples in Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, I guess the smallholder farmers there are they small or not, but there are many big farmers. So they have collaterals, they have higher numbers of cattle, etc. And that makes them probably, you can test this type of innovative financial products. Meanwhile, in our case, it's very difficult. So how can we replicate what you are trying to do for smallholder farmers? Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Nadam. Maybe since you had 3 questions, usually we take 3 questions and then move it, but you had 3 questions. So let's go, Bob. You must have an answer to some of that. Thanks.
Well, those are really big questions. And frankly, I've been having the same thoughts as in the build up to this session and listening. And people are heading right now to the climate COP, right? And a lot of what's being discussed here is in the context of implementing the global biodiversity framework, mainstreaming across agriculture. There's another Rio COP, which happens in December of next year, which is that of the UN Convention on Combating Drought and Desertification. And they just had their meeting of the committee for the review of the implementation of the convention, which stated that in the recent years, 100 million hectares of land are being degraded every year. That adds up to the upcoming COP non-state actors coalition target of applying regenerative and other sustainable practices to about 500 million hectares. So as we just heard from Nadam, the challenges, particularly in arid areas, which also have the most displaced people, are going to be huge. I'm personally hopeful that the COP16 of UNCCD, hosted by Saudi Arabia, will bring together more resources than before for that convention. But I think we're going to have to look beyond, as Nadam indicated, the usual or even innovative solutions. And we're going to have to look as a first order, how do you begin to hang on to and slowly restore some of the most devastated areas so that you can have food, water, and nutrition for people. If we look at North Africa, there is a West Africa water tower centered in Guinea. There's an East Africa water tower centered in Ethiopia. So in addition to all the innovative finance efforts, we're going to have to look at what is the major ecological function for those areas, particularly the most challenged areas, where you need to provide food and water for people. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob. Does anybody have a question about, I'm very interested on the answer to the smallholders and how they're being attracted into these types of cases, business cases.
Did you want me to address that or?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Greg?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, on the question of like what the model I presented. So we do have so the soy and cattle farmers tend to be more medium, larger farmers, but the agroforestry and non-timber forest products is much more of a small. There can be larger scale operations, but it's much more of a smallholder sort of operation. So the needs are different, of course. Yeah, they have collateral and credit issues. They need more technical assistance, et cetera. So I think, when I think of this IFAD model we created, it's the secret or sauce or whatever. The main kind of components of it it's about being in a region and identifying what is there a role for finance? Is there a financial need to help drive the transformation we're trying to create? What type of products and technical assistance and services are needed to provide farmers? Who's out there who's in a position to deliver that type of service and financing? And then what we do is try to kind of map out and define, what are the type of production models and E&S requirements and, et cetera. What do we want? What do we want capital to actually be financing. So I think as environmental groups, we can play a good role to kind of help define for these institutions what's needed and the parameters around it, and then really try to raise the visibility of that, support them, support the create an ecosystem of different actors that are working towards this, and really try to drive more capital flow and technical assistance. And so I think that type of idea is replicable to different agricultural systems, including smallholders. That approach can be kind of tailored to different places, even where the agricultural need is different. So that's what I would say to that one.
Perfect. Thank you. Let's move to the next questions, because we have 3 more, and I'd like to cover it before we close because we're going to be over time. So we have Gilles, Tulip Hotel. So Tulip, you can go ahead after Gilles, and then James de Sousa Shields, who we all know as Mark, aka Mark. Go ahead, Gilles.
Yes, can you hear me? Perfect. I think that an important share of our biodiversity loss is due to standardization driven by massive value chain all over the world. And, companies are asking for specific species, specific weights, colors, and so on. And I was wondering, if we want to build an agriculture that respects biodiversity, we need value chains much more open to a variety of products. So maybe adapted to smaller quantity but more diverse products. So I would like to know whether there are any area of research also to support some innovations in the agri-food system in order to help them to adjust the scale and develop with the same efficiency, but the transformation ability, but based on more diverse products. Don't know if I'm clear with my question, but I think that part of the problem is due to this standardization driven by value chain. So how we can support value chain in working with more diverse products? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take another one or another 2. Tulip. Sorry, I don't know that. If you have a question, or do you want us to take the one from the chat? There we go. Go ahead. You have to come off mute.
Lorna, maybe we can take his
to Mark
from the chat, since he already wrote.
Can you read it out, because I don't see it as well?
Yes. So let me just. We have a lot of questions actually. So Tulip asked. Oh, okay.
I have unmuted myself already. My name is Esther Kenyi, and I work for IFAD based in South Sudan. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have already even put my question on the chat. I would like to know whether there is any analysis done on the types of trees that can be used to can be planted together with some selected value chains. That's one. Then the second one is, is there any economic value that the farmer will get from the trees that they are going to use with particular value chains? And then the third one is, okay, that also comes together with the analysis, because there are certain crops that could be carrying pests for a particular crop. So if analysis is not properly done, then that can also have impact on the main value chain. So that goes to the question that was there any value chain analysis? Was there any analysis done to support to justify why we need to use certain trees for that? Thank you.
Thank you. And then I guess one more. Mark, do you want to have your question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, natural capital's been a concept that's around since for a long, long time, 1980s even, I guess. And the business case we can make for applications of technologies and methodologies at the smallholder level and come out with net profit after even fairly high cost financing. But there's just so many barriers in the way. And I was really interested, Greg, in your projections for the amount of financing you think you're going to get. I've been involved in this kind of investment since when it was called ethical investment. You don't need to see me to know how long I've been around doing that. What's the tipping point? Why do you believe you can get $1 billion? That's my question.
Great, thanks, Mark. Can somebody answer Gilles first about the value chain, the biodiversity, the companies? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I think as a community, including many more than those of us here, Gilles absolutely right. We're going to have to be much more intentional about crop diversity, and the development model has really been around value chains, whether it's from developed exporting countries or helping developing countries export or sell into markets. I think one way to think about it is the equation of what kinds of practices help the producer, help the local consumer, which then goes quickly to diversity, including cover crops, rotational crops, and also helps the natural environment. And I think if you put that framing, then you can think about how do the different innovative financing tools help you get to that more sustainable model. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. That's a good point. And now I think it's Esther's questions on the trees and the analysis of the trees. I mean, this is kind of an interesting question. I'm hoping everyone does their due diligence. Leander, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we always include cost-benefit analysis to the work in anything proposed. Of course, I'm not an agronomist, no. So first, you work together with both the local producers as well as the specialists about the potential types of systems that you can implement, and like which trees grow, which trees are of interest, etc. But then we always include cost-benefit analysis in the assessments as well, ideally under different scenarios, considering, of course, time and resource constraints. But we always include economic assessments in the proposals that we do.
Thank you. And finally, the last question from Mark to Greg, I think, specifically about your $1 billion.
Yeah, sure. So, Brazil's probably, a bit of a different context and where a lot of other people are working. I mean, Brazil is the #1 soy producer in the world. Over 30% of the world's soy is produced by Brazil. They're the largest cattle exporter in the world and one of the largest producers. So these are this is like a really big, major global industries that they have there. And there already is, billions of dollars of finance that flows for annual crop finance to these sectors. And so what we're really talking about is trying to create, particular products that are longer term, that support agricultural transitions, that, favor production without deforestation. And, there's the big potential market's quite large. Yes, there are barriers to expanding that investment, but, we feel given the size of the market and that, at least in the cattle and soy sectors, the, farmers are creditworthy enough to absorb this type of capital that you can get to these type of numbers. I mean, $1 billion is actually not a large number in the context of that market. We need to get a lot bigger than that if we feel like we're really going to influence it. I agree that the agroforestry and the smallholder type of operations are not going to get to $1 billion in the next 2 years, but they're, they have the potential to get bigger as well, but not at that scale probably. So thanks for the question.
Thank you, Greg. And I don't know if there's maybe one more question that we can pull off the webinar chat, and then I'll just close off with a couple sentences.
There was
Annette?
one question from Simon Holland, who asked how we can avoid some of the barriers set up in carbon markets, such as expensive Big Four audits to keep biodiversity open for innovation with fast-moving startups, quoted 50 to 90,000 to audit our projects in carbon.
Okay, who's the carbon person? Who's the carbon expert here? Anyone want to take that on? Matt or? Next time you have to give us the sure thing. Does anybody want to take on the carbon question? And the carbon markets?
Sorry, I can just quickly, just an idea, because of course this is it's a difficult question and not able to answer the whole issue there. No, but the barriers to carbon markets and the costs of audits. So one way to do it is actually you don't audit the farmers, you audit the businesses. There is also an additional reason to do that, and that is then businesses, if they are audited, then they keep the you say like then they can actually claim the carbon neutrality for their supply chain versus not doing that. And then of course, if there is a genuine interest into focusing specifically on providing carbon credits to farmers, then there is organizations that work on that now. But if not, one way of doing it is actually the cost is for the business/investor and not for the smallholder producer.
Thank you, Leander, for saving us. Just before Anne wants to do her survey, and I encourage everyone just to stay to the last gasp, I just wanted to just close out with just a couple of points here. That we see in these series of presentations and some of the other work we've been doing is that the challenge, despite the positive business cases for many types of the investments, even for smallholders, still remain considerable, and it's going to require coming together of investors, farmers, regulators, definitely, and value chain actors, the private sector, to address. The work that IFAD does in many countries, from dry to humid, support both the positive and negative cases. So we really need to work to find the sort of the vein or the throughput or whatever, whether it's a market, a silver bullet regulation, or some fantastic investors. So I think we can say from IFAD's perspective, we have our work cut out for us, and especially to reach our own sort of targets coming up in IFAD 13. So I want to let Anais close, but just before, I want to thank our very prepared speakers and super interesting. I will be peppering you with questions in an email after this that I didn't get to ask. But I very much appreciate your participation, your work on this going forward, and I hope we can collaborate on something together, maybe more practical in the field. And also thank our participants for showing up and during a heavy schedule and a heavy time. So thanks, and please don't go until you answer Anais's very nice questions.
Yeah, it's an automatic survey, so it will appear right when we stop the webinar. So yes, again, thank you very much to the IRF network, to the ECG biodiversity team, to you, Leander, to you, Bob, and to you, Greg, for answering all the questions, and for this very insightful presentation. Also to you, Matthew. And I wish you all a very good rest of the day. And yes, please answer the automatic survey that will appear once the webinar is finished. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.